Dice represent more than cold math or random number generation. They're the mystic bones we consult on matters of life and death. Your job is to understand the probabilities without killing the intrigue for your players. If you can walk that line in your design, you'll have magic every time at the table this happens. I'm Michael Willer, and my TTRPG turned 8 this year. In that near decade of design evolution, I've tried out a lot of dice mechanics and made a mess of most of them. Here's my story. So originally my game was just a port of D&D 5th edition 2014. I was using the open game license. I really just had this setting in mind. I had the game that I wanted to play in my world with my classes and features and things. And so I was building that stuff and leaving the core mechanics up to D&D, which I already knew, and everyone else that I knew also already knew. And that worked fine for a long time, but I started intuitively understanding that D&D is designed to feel like D&D. And as long as you like that and that works for the type of game you're designing, great. But there are certain quirks of that system that I don't really gel with and weren't really feeling like they fit in my game. Matt Colville, who is like a legend, if you don't know him, what are you doing? Go find his videos and watch them and then come back to me. But he was talking about the idea of the D20 roll oftentimes being kind of a, do I get to take my turn or not, dice roll. When you're talking about rolling to attack and then you roll your damage, oftentimes that attack misses. In fact, the game is designed to make those attacks miss very frequently. I started getting kind of frustrated with that. And then in late 2022, early 2023, the Wizards of the Coast open game license disaster happened. People freaked out because they thought that the license was going to get changed or revoked, and that was something that I was relying on. And so I went to my co-designer and was like, look, Matt, like we gotta rethink some things. We've got to rename, basically just start the process of making the game mechanics ours. And in that, the first thing we changed was the attack roll. I had the idea of basically taking the damage roll and attack roll and combining them. We had some features that would say if you roll the maximum on, a D4, then you get to bump it up or roll another die or and it was kind of constantly changing. We still had, D20 plus modifier for ability rolls and stuff like that. But it felt very cumbersome to do this, adding lots of different dice. And what was supposed to feel like a big moment all together ended up just being a whole bunch of math and a whole bunch of interpreting the results. And it had killed a sense of mysticism, of consulting the bones, of what do the dice tell me happened? It was just math, and players were kind of trying to predict what their results would be in this really hard to figure out way, and they were kind of stressing over it, and it was always slow. And so a year ago, I said to my co-designer, I think we've taken this version of the game as far as we can. I want to go back to 0. I wanted to try something bespoke for our game. What that involved was, a whole bunch of okay, what is our game? What is it not? And doing all that stuff. And the dice were where I started. For me, the dice were a huge problem because I also really get frustrated doing mental math all the time. I wanted to see if I could do a mathless system. And I hadn't played a lot of other dice systems, so I ended up doing a lot of research. And at the time, Daggerheart with their 2D12 was coming out. Drawsteel had their 2D10 system. And I tried 2D10 where instead of adding together and keeping a result and having a modifier and all of that stuff, it was just keep the highest. And the reason I went that way was because D&D has advantage and disadvantage. And every person I've talked to about that system where it's just come up in the moment of oh, you get advantage of this. Oh, hell yeah. It always feels really good on kind of a gut level. You like getting to roll 2 dice and keeping the higher result. And that was what I keyed into. And that is the thread that I followed all the way through to design the dice system I have now, which is that I wanted the feeling on just a lizard brain gut level to feel good, instinctive, intuitive, naturally just what you would expect, even if it's something that somebody's never done before, if they're learning it new. And so following, 2D10, I created a system and no math, keep highest, and started rolling it, and it didn't work. it just didn't feel right. Is something about it was too swingy. It was just like without the consistency of a modifier affecting your roll, it just didn't actually bear out what I had assumed would feel and be the case in the math side of things. So kind of went back to the drawing board, did some more research. I'd never played a dice pool game before, and ultimately like adding a d20 to get advantage, that's just creating a tiny dice pool. And so it's like, okay, maybe I'll kind of track down that idea. And I ended up doing some more research. A lot of dice pool games tend to be a whole bunch of d6s. But a major complaint about dice pool games in particular is that when you have like 10 dice and you roll them all, and now it's this interpretation problem of like, okay, let me count okay, I got a 6 here, I got a 5, like, and like even if you have a fixed target number or you only count 6s as successes, whatever it is, it's still a lot of like figuring out your results before you actually know what happened. And that didn't feel right either. I wanted it to be quick. And so I went with small dice pools. And I also like the idea of like step dice, like where you have d4s, d6s, d8s, d10s, d12s as your abilities themselves, so that you can kind of see them getting better. Like lots of games do this. I did not come up with that by any stretch. So I ended up with step dice, dice pools, keep the highest result, and then, rolling over a target number, which is pretty common. There are roll under systems, right? So you can have, let's say, a d20 roll under where you roll your d20 and your skill on your character sheet is the number that you're trying to roll underneath. That's intuitive from the like skill number goes up, I get better side of things. But rolling a lower number, I think most people agree, just inherently feels worse. It, like on an intuitive lizard brain level, it just doesn't feel as good. Okay, I kind of want a target number then. I want a target number assigned by the GM because I like that relationship. Like when I'm running games, I like being able to pick the target number for the player and kind of like craft it around the situation instead of just like, it's always going to be the same and you just roll your skill. And so we have D12 as the highest thing that you can roll, no math. That means our challenge scores is what we call our target number. It's fixed from 2 to 12. That's all it'll ever be. That feels very transparent with the player. Like, okay, if I say your challenge score is a 6, it's going to be a little bit tough, but doable. But is it doable? That's the thing. So if you're rolling step dice and you have D4s, you can't beat a 6, right? Like it's actually not possible if you're not adding anything together. You're just keeping the highest result. The highest result possible is a 4. So I kind of wandered down the road of like, okay, maybe exploding dice. Again, lots of games do this. The one that I've played, and maybe the most famous example of it, is Savage Worlds. Typically, you're rolling a d6 and then whatever your skill die is. So it's a d6 and a d4, d6 and a d12, whatever. And then if either of them hits the maximum result, it explodes. You roll again and add that. And if it keeps exploding, you just keep adding them, and potentially you get very, very high numbers. The first session I ever played of Savage Worlds Rifts, granted, my character died because the GM rolled a massive attack and one-shotted me. So that's what exploding dice do. They make a swingy game, and you also need a game that's, again, adding math. It's like math, right? So that kind of felt not right. I didn't have tiers of success or like rewards for, rolling extra high, getting you extra results or anything. So, okay, did some research. And I found a Reddit post about cascading dice, and I'll put the username on because I don't remember off the top of my head. The Reddit post was basically explaining that, like, if you don't want the uncontrollable nature of exploding dice, you can have them cascade down instead. And so if you roll that maximum result, let's say you roll a d10, get your 10, you pick up a d8, roll that, and add that to your result. And if that 8 rolls an 8, then you take a 6, and you keep going on down to the smallest die that you have in your game, which is probably a d4. That kind of felt good, but again, I'm not doing math. And so it's not about hitting the maximum result and then adding a lower die. Maybe it's about, if you fail, you roll your d12 against a challenge score of 5. You fail at it, and it's kind of an embarrassing moment of like, I'm supposed to be good at this. Well, maybe then is when you cascade. You still have a chance. Pick up a d10, try again. That felt kind of good. That felt like a little cumbersome, but it's only going to come up when the character should be good at something and is just like embarrasses themselves on the first roll. And then you get to kind of save yourself. It's only going to come up in those situations. So how do you solve the problem of a player wanting to be able to beat a challenge score that their dice cannot reach? Mostly what I was finding was that it brings a sense of realism if there's a hard cap on what your ability level allows you to do. Okay, like that makes sense, but it doesn't quite match the tone of my game, which is not meant to model like survivalist realism. It's meant to model like, you know, scrappy heroism. Like you're gonna have a tough time trying to do what you're trying to do, but the game wants you to try and then wants to reward bold attempts. So how do we do that? And I had a resource going for a different part of the game. I was like, what if you spent that resource to do what we call hypershifting? And that's just taking your base dice pool and bumping it up one rank. So you go from 3d6 up to 3d8. It's always going to be the same type of dice. You're not mixing and matching a bunch of different dice, having to find them. You just pick up whatever dice it is. And if you can, if you have that, d6 pool, but you're trying to beat that 7, hypershift, and now you can roll 3d8. So basically, instead of having numerical modifiers, our modifiers are instead hypershift downshift, where the benefits of hypershifting are you get a higher dice pool, the benefits of an edge are that you get more dice in your dice pool, and then the opposites for downshift and for glitch. I really liked the idea of having opposed rolls. Like I wanted, especially like when a player character is like defending on their turn in a fight, if all you're doing is like referencing your character sheet and reading a number out loud, it's pretty passive. And eventually the GM will just remember that and they won't even ask you. They'll just say, okay, and I hit you. And it's like, okay, how much? And then you just write your number down. Like that feels very disengaged versus like rolling to defend yourself. And now the stat on your sheet is the dice that you use to try and fend off attacks. And that felt better to me also, like having this, like making the dice a feature. And yes, it might slow down those moments a little bit, but if the feeling of rolling them is that like intuitive kind of like fun vibe that I was going for, then maybe it still actually feels good in practice. And maybe it keeps people engaged because they get to do something to defend themselves. So we get to the end of the year and my design partner, Matt, and I are doing internal testing. It's starting to become clear that this whole like cascading downshift thing is mathematically sound, but very clunky. I had internalized like how it worked because I designed it, but in trying to describe it in the handbook, it wasn't possible to describe it succinctly. And I had all of this text, I had all of these models for how to explain it in different ways, and it just felt off. And this is maybe the most important like piece of advice in this video. Kill your darlings. Kill your darlings. I was in love with this cascading mechanic because it felt bespoke to our game, and I was kind of attached to it. It felt like a badge of honor to have this like unique mechanic, but it was clunky. It was clunky and it was impossible to explain. And right before we launched playtesting, like open testing to like other people, friends of friends, acquaintances, like people you could find online who just wanted to join at the start of this year, I cut it. And I cut it specifically because we had lost that intuitive vibe and that streamlined vibe that I wanted, that the original set of dice mechanics were supposed to solve by cutting the math and knowing instantly as soon as you look at your dice that the highest number I roll, that's my result. Well, but maybe not. If you fail the roll, then you're rolling again. Like it just ruined a lot of the things that were supposed to be really good. And the best part was, the solution solved other problems. The solution was just add one more die to all of the base pools in the game. So instead of your abilities being 1d6, they're 2d6 now by default. And now we're kind of leaning more into the dice pool aspect because that was a little bit missing. Like a lot of dice rolls were still just one die. And that also felt kind of correct because then it solves the glitch problem. Glitch changes to just take a die out of the pool. Here's the thing. I've had this game tested now. We've been running tests for exactly 6 months, 6 full months. And we've had people who have played hundreds of role-playing games. We've had people who have played only D&D, but for years. We've had people who've never played a role-playing game ever, and this was their first. And across that whole spectrum, there is a common sentiment that keeps coming back, which is that the system feels intuitive and streamlined. Their words. The first playtest we did was January 1st, and then a month later, we did part 2. And one of the players in the review sort of feedback portion of the second session said, she'd only played this game once for like 2.5 hours. And she was like, I was sure that I was going to forget all of the mechanics. In fact, she said, I did forget all the mechanics. But as soon as we started playing again, they came right back. That felt really freaking cool. Does my dice system obscure the odds of success? Like, is the math opaque to the players? Yeah, it is a little bit. But they have never once said that they don't feel like they know whether or not they should try a roll or not. That they were able to go like, yeah, no, I think I have a good shot at this. And then feel like the results were correct. That's the difference. That you're not sitting at the table doing math to try and figure out whether or not you can do something, that you're actually feeling it and then going for it. For something to feel intuitive, yes, simplicity helps, but it helps specifically because I think an intuitive thing to learn is something that from the point that you learn it to the point that it moves out of your working memory and into your rhythm and your instinctive knowing what to do is a very short period of time and takes very little effort. There's no like, oh, I thought it was going to be, oh, I thought you were going to do that, but okay, we're doing this instead. Like, there's no confusion along the way because everything just feels like it's in its place. And if you have a system like that, I think you've hit gold, specifically because the dice rolls should be moments of excitement and chance and mysticism of seeing a path diverge left or right and knowing that as soon as that die tips over onto the final face, that is your fate. And I think that rocks. I think that feels good. That's why you see in actual play people pre-doing the math so that when they roll the d20, the result has already been picked as something that they know will either be a success or a failure. They want to know it as soon as they see it. The point is the kind of like lizard brain instinct that a lot of people have of certain things feel certain ways. I think that is directly tied to that mystical moment of the dice hitting the table, of consulting the bones, as I said at the beginning, and of knowing your fate as soon as you see what the results are. I think that all ties together to create a role-playing experience that is ultimately designed to help tell stories. Like, that's the point of the dice. Does fate agree with your character or not? Let's roll to find out.